Hello, I'm Wendy. This is On a Side Note, and the story of the haunted Scandinavian Methodist Episcopal Church. It was a crime of the century. 2 young ladies murdered, and a well-known, beloved reverend was the suspect. The tragedy played out in May of 1896 at the Salt Lake Scandinavian Methodist Episcopal Church located at 158 South, 200 East. Charred bones, along with 2 razors, a butcher knife, a garter buckle, and a belt buckle were found in the basement furnace, and a decomposing torso was uncovered in the dirt floor nearby. Clues led police to identify the victim as Miss Henrietta Clausen, who had gone missing the previous fall. Miss Clausen had been seen in the company of the church's Reverend Francis Hermans prior to her disappearance. Upon further investigation, police found trunks full of items belonging to Miss Clausen in the Reverend's study. But that's not all. They also found items belonging to another missing woman named Annie Samuelson. And wait, there's more. It seems the good Reverend had been embezzling funds from the church to the tune of around $7,000. And all 3 of his wives had died under mysterious circumstances, as did 2 of his 3 children. Oh, and the sister of his second wife also went missing. It appears Reverend Hermans was a serial killer. Unfortunately, he never stood trial for his crimes as he fled Salt Lake. And although there were sightings of him over the years, he was never apprehended. In October of 1896, an article in the Salt Lake Tribune reported that the tenants of the apartment portion of the Scandinavian Methodist Episcopal Church were convinced that the place was haunted by the spirits of Miss Clausen and Miss Samuelson. All of the following comes from that article. Mysterious sounds in the building began after the discoveries in the basement, and some tenants believed the weird noises were heard weeks before that. But the disturbances had become more frequent and the tenants had become more agitated. Stories from the tenants revealed that a favorite pastime of the ghosts was throwing coal and scattering kindling about the basement. The article states, quote, "The ghosts evidently go to the trouble of carefully collecting the coal and the sticks after they have become tired of their sport, for the fuel is always found in the morning piled just the same as it was the evening before, which has convinced the most incredulous of the tenants that the coal throwing is done by supernatural agencies, since no earthly being could possibly restore a pile of coal to precisely the form it was in before being distributed about the dark cellar." End quote. Now, the spirits didn't always throw things around. They also pounded loudly on the furnace, a furnace that was no longer in use. The pounding frightened the tenants to the point that they told Church Reverend John Hansen they were going to leave the building. Reverend Hansen, not believing any of this ghost stuff, jokingly told the tenants that the ghosts were occupying the building without his permission. This did not go over well with some of the tenants, especially Mrs. Swenson, who had some experiences of her own. One evening, she pulled down the window curtains, only to find it rolled clear to the top the next morning. She could not explain how this happened when no one had touched the curtains after they were pulled down. In another instance, Mrs. Swenson heard her screen door repeatedly slam as if being moved by a strong wind, but upon inspection, she found there was no wind. She fastened the door and walked away, only to hear it banging once again. She was too frightened to investigate, but this solidified her belief that a ghost was tampering with her door. Mrs. Swenson wasn't the only one in the family to have an experience. Her young daughter also claimed to see the ghost of a woman in her bedroom. Then there was the experience of 2 girls from Santaquin, Utah, who spent the night in the building. Quote, "They turned out the electric light in their room on retiring, but had hardly been in bed a minute when the room was lighted up with a soft glow. The girls thought the illumination came from the incandescent light, and one of them got up to turn it off again. But before she reached the light, the glow died away. When she was again in bed, the room once more became bright. The people of the house declared that whenever one of the girls would put her feet upon the floor, the light would cease, but would come on again the moment she transferred her feet to the bed. At last, the terrified girls covered their heads, and they know not when the lights went out for good." End quote. In their minds, and the minds of the tenants, the ghosts of one or both of the girls was to blame for this. What caused the tenants to wait so long to make up their minds that there were ghosts in the buildings? That would be the lack of moaning coming from the ghosts. The article explains this, quote, "According to all experiences, the spirits of murdered women moan. But though the people in the building have listened intently, there has been no note of suffering in any of the sounds," end quote. The tenants were left convinced that the spirits of the two murdered women had come to stay at the church. Nothing more was written about the ghosts of the church, and there is no way of investigating their claims today. The church was sold in 1906 to George Ebert for $9,500. It seems that in the 10 years since the murders, not a single cent was donated to upkeep the building, and it had fallen into disrepair. A new church would soon be built on the corner of 4th East and 5th South. The old church was torn down in the summer of 1906 to make way for an apartment building, which was also demolished at some point. Apartments built in 2016 now stand on the site. I wonder, have the spirits of the two murdered women found their new home there? You can hear more about the case of Reverend Francis Hermans on episode 3, Bones in the Furnace, on the Dead History podcast. I'll link to their website in the show notes. And join me for episode 14 with Matt and Jennifer of the Dead History to talk about the intersection of history and lore and how ghosts fit into our history and historic preservation. That episode drops just in time for Halloween, so I'll see you spooks then.